A lot of people say my stories are hard to believe, especially ones like this. They can't fathom something so horrific and egregious exists. But in the case of the radioactive hornet, I can hear the naysayers already saying, "Hey, Rodney, you just told me a buzzer the size of a tractor fought its way out of a lab, killed multiple people, and haunted the skies of Nebraska for at least a few days." Something like that happens, even in a town as small as Lewitt. The rest of the world hears about it, right? Maybe. Or maybe we're just not listening to the right people. I believe we should take a harder look at the whispers, the rumors, the fringe conspiracies. Shows like this one, weekly stories that you write off as fiction. Sometimes, the real truth is buried in things like that. I'm saying this because I want you to know what happened next was real and horrible. As I sat across from Caroline in that Greasy Spoon diner in Lewitt, Nebraska, a feeling of dread washed over me, a desperate worry. She just told me that the lethal radioactive hornet had died, that she'd killed it with a healthy dose of insecticide. But I just had this feeling that her story wasn't over. Caroline must have seen the worry in my eyes, the tightening of my fingers on my fork as I ate my pancakes that had just arrived. 'Cause she cocked her head, looked at me with a sort of commiserating pity that felt way older than her 16 years. She told me that I was right to be concerned. See, she thought killing that hornet was the end of the horror show that had infiltrated Lewitt. But actually, it was just the beginning. You're listening to Run, Fool! I'm Rodney Barnes, and this is episode 61, Radioactive Hornets, Part 2. Now just to reiterate, Caroline had just blasted a canister of insecticide into the face of a gargantuan, atomically mutated hornet. Melted it to a pulp before her eyes, which was great, because it had been terrorizing her for the better part of a day. After that, Caroline called 911. Her mom, Sarah, got carted off to the hospital, unconscious, and the police swarmed the moors, where Mrs. Moore had sadly died. The feds and military arrived soon after that, smoothed things over with a quick clean-up and cover story. Gas leak at the lab, they said. Classic. The Moores had one too. Not too creative, but who am I to judge? The FBI also told Caroline not to tell anyone what she'd seen. This was top secret government stuff. If she told a soul, they'd know. I'm steaming through all this kind of fast, because the point is, it was over. Caroline could leave the whole ordeal in her rear view. Her mom was still in bad shape at the hospital, which worried her. But she was also relieved. The tragedy was being handled, and she didn't have to be the one to do it. No one expected her to. So Caroline was free to go back to her life again. And forgotten in all this, maybe even by Caroline herself, was that her life was track and field. States was still next week, and the town of Lewitt still expected Caroline to win. So she went back to training, shocked by how easy it was to act like nothing had ever happened. The week flew by. The morning of the meet, Caroline went to see her mom before she left. She stepped into the sterile hospital room, listening to the machines beep steadily. Sarah was asleep on a starchy pillow. Not in a coma, but she'd been really hurt. She kept slipping out of consciousness. Even when she was awake, she was delirious. Caroline sat by her bedside, took her hand, and told her mom that it was finally here, the state championship. She talked about how she was ready, how her body was primed to run the fastest time of her life, and win. But she was still scared. She winced, hating how feeble her voice sounded. She'd done so much, killed a monster, saved her mother, kept a government secret. Why did failure still terrify her? Caroline stared at her mother's sleeping face, took a deep breath, and squeezed her hand. She'd hoped next time she saw her mom, Sarah would be awake, and Caroline could tell her all about how her daughter was the 800-meter Nebraska state champion. After that, Caroline left. She was gone by the time the hospital door swung shut, so she didn't hear Sarah's heart rate monitor pick up. It got faster and faster and faster until her eyes shot open. These weren't delirious in and out of consciousness eyes. This was a moment of clarity, her first since she'd been brought in. Something had finally gotten through to her. Maybe her daughter's voice, who knows? But whatever it was had woken Sarah up and scared the absolute hell out of her. Her voice croaked, unused and feeble, as she tried to scream out a question to no one in particular. She gasped, "Did they get the nest?" No one answered. No one was there. So Sarah screamed her question again and again. Her heart rate monitor was going nuts. The nurses rushed in, trying to help, but Sarah was thrashing around like some kind of wild animal. See, she was asking a question, but she didn't expect an answer, because deep down, she already knew. They weren't safe yet, not by a long shot. While the nurses tried to restrain a panicked Sarah, Caroline was on her way to Lewitt High. There she joined her coach and teammates as they all boarded a bright yellow school bus bound for Omaha, where the state championship was. Caroline sat in the back, headphones on, trying to get her head in the game. She closed her eyes, tuned out her other teammates, their jokes, laughter. A low buzz started up, a faint background tremor. Caroline's eyes shot open. She snatched her headphones off and swirled around to look out the rear window of the bus at the sky. It was blue with fluffy clouds, empty. Caroline watched it, listening for that buzz, the subtle drone of horror that made her break out in a cold sweat. But she didn't hear it anymore. She exhaled. Wow, she must really be nervous about the race. It was making her nuts. But when she was about to put her headphones back on, she heard it again. Her eyes shot towards the sky, hyper alert, watching as a plane flew overhead. Caroline swore to herself she needed to calm down. She shoved her headphones on, turned up the volume, then leaned against the ripped-up synthetic bus seat. Even so, her heart didn't stop pounding for the rest of the ride. About an hour later, Caroline was at the stadium in Omaha, pinning her race number to her jersey. Then she started her warm-up routine. She still had her headphones on. Refusing to let any little sound mess with her, she did some striders on the side of the track, then sank to the ground to stretch, when a bright yellow hornet appeared in front of her face. She gasped, felt her body go rigid, but a second later, she laughed. It was just a cartoony version of the bug, etched onto another girl's jacket. The girl was walking over to join a group of runners, all wearing uniforms with that hornet emblem. Caroline recognized them. It was Exeter High. Their team mascot was the hornet. This girl, Jessa, was always her biggest competition in the 800. Caroline's stomach flipped. She tried to take a breath. This was what she didn't want today. Fear. Her coach came over, told her she was on deck. Caroline tried to suppress the butterflies that rose up. No fear, she told herself as she jogged towards the starting line. She did a few high knees in the grassy infield, taking in hordes of spectators from all over the state. The stands were packed. The best athletes from Nebraska warmed up on the two-green field. A nice breeze swirled through the hubbub, rustling the tall netting that lined one side of the stadium. As Caroline leaned over the stretch, she froze. There it was again, that distant goading. Bzzz. Someone grabbed her shoulder. Caroline yelped. A man stood behind her. He was in his 50s, had that intense, furtive look. You know the guy, the kind you can't totally trust, but he's intriguing enough where you want to give him a chance. He said his name was Rocky, and he didn't mince words. He immediately asked Caroline what she knew about a deadly nuclear-infected bug the government was trying to cover up. Caroline's jaw dropped. How did he? Before she could say a thing, he told her he wrote an article all the way back in 2013 about the giant radioactive pest that took to Nebraska skies. He'd been keeping an eye out ever since. When he heard about the so-called gas explosions a few days ago, he knew something was up. He'd followed Caroline here because he knew she'd seen something. She lived next door to the Moores. Her mom worked at the lab. Before Caroline could say anything, the speaker blared. An announcement. The fourth heat of the girls' 800 meters needed to go to the starting line. Now. That was Caroline's heat. The last one. The one with the fastest seed times. The heat of winners. She turned back to Rocky, mouth open. Then, her ears filled with that buzzing sound. She shook her head, frustrated, worried. Why was all this happening? She just wanted to focus on her race, and everything was making her freak. No fear, she told herself. Not today. She snapped at Rocky, telling him to buzz off, and yeah, pun intended. Then she jogged over to the starting line, ignoring Rocky's insistent calls at her back. Her stomach was in knots. Her mind raced, but she told it to shut up, to focus. No fear. She reached the line, took her place, third from the inside. Jesser from the Hornets was on her right. Caroline ventured to look at her, locking into the Hornet emblem on her jersey, but she tore her gaze away when she heard the official say, "Runners, sit!" She leaned forward, body poised, waiting for the gun to go off. Then it did. Caroline's body sprang forward. Her legs ate up the track this time. She didn't try to play any games. She didn't lurk behind a leader. She just ran. Ran from Rocky, from her past failures, from the memories of carnage and terror that she just bore witness to. Ran for her team, her mom, for Lewitt, and for herself. Her spikes flew across the rubber. Its spring and her easy stride made her feel like she was floating. The first lap passed in a breeze. There was no pull of muscle ache, no strain of her locked arms. She saw that little hornet patch float into her periphery. Jesser was passing her, but the sight of that ghastly insect gave Caroline a surge of adrenaline. She picked it up, plowing through the next 200 meters. Then she rounded that last bend, and the finish line came into view. She didn't know where the other runners were, and she didn't care. All that mattered was Caroline and that strip of paint on the track ahead. She could feel her ponytail streaming behind her. The breeze tickled the sweat that covered her neck. She silently repeated, "No fear, no fear. Don't let fear inside. Don't let it in." Nothing was going to get in her way. She was Lewitt's hometown hero. This race was hers. She covered the rest of the distance in seconds, and as she crossed the finish line, the stands erupted. Cheers filled the air as she bent over, heaving. Her legs trembled, barely holding her up, but her heart swelled. She'd won. Not only that, a glance at the clock told her she'd broken the state record. The crowd continued its roar, and Caroline finally stood up, ready to bask in her glory. But when she looked at the spectators, she realized something wasn't right. See, that crowd, they weren't cheering for Caroline. They weren't cheering at all. They were screaming. When you think about businesses with criminally good sales, like Aviator Nation and Justin Bieber's Drew House, sure, you think about an in-demand product, a premeditated brand, and scary good marketing. But an often overlooked secret is actually a business behind the business making selling and buying simple. For millions of businesses, that business is Shopify. Nobody does selling better than Shopify, home of the #1 checkout on the planet. Businesses that sell more sell on Shopify. Upgrade your business and get the same checkout Aviator Nation uses. Sign up for your $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/run, all lowercase. Go to shopify.com/run to upgrade your selling today. Shopify.com/run.
When you get into an escape plug-in hybrid, you get the perfect mix. You can chill in electric mode, turn it up in gas mode, or get the best of both in hybrid mode. Choose how you move in the all-in-one Escape. Right now, get 1.99% APR purchase financing for up to 72 months on the 2025 Escape plug-in hybrid. For details, visit your Toronto area Ford store or Ford.ca.
Caroline didn't need to look up to know what was coming. She could feel it in her exhausted bones, an instinct she didn't even know she had. But she looked anyway. An airborne monstrosity tore through the sky, accompanied by a loud buzz that echoed through the stadium, making the ground shudder. The Hornet. It was impossible. Caroline had seen it die, but it was back. This sight seemed to be the most horrifying thing in the world to Caroline. It was too bad it was about to get even worse, because then the clouds around that devastating critter parted, revealing at least 10 more dark masses flying through the air, their wings stretched out wide, their bodies swollen and lethal. Yeah, it wasn't just one hornet. It was a whole swarm of them. Caroline's weak legs shook so hard, she thought she'd fall over, even in the face of doom. She was trying to play out what had happened. She guessed that the hornet she'd killed had laid some eggs in that nest of hers, eggs no one knew about, which meant a whole lot of radioactive offspring were coming to kill her and avenge their old mom's demise. The ground shook as the spectators tried to flee the stands. They ran over one another, falling and shoving in the process. The parking lot was on the opposite side of the stadium, so most of them flooded the track, trying to get to their cars. They streamed past Caroline as she stared dumbly up at the sky, like she was a stone in a river. Someone grabbed her arm as she looked right into the face of Rocky, the reporter. His eyes were alight with fear and exhilaration. Recorder in hand, he said he couldn't believe it. Everyone had called him crazy, but there they were in all their glory. He'd been right all along. Before Rocky could finish, a hornet landed behind him, hard. The ground trembled with its arrival. Rocky didn't even get a chance to turn around. In one sadistic, fluid motion, the creature thrust his stinger directly through his throat. Rocky's mouth flew open. His recorder still held aloft, like he was asking the hornet for a soundbite. Blood trickled down his lips as the skin on his neck bubbled and frothed from the stinger's deadly radiation. Caroline screamed, but her terror was drowned out by the absolute bloodbath around her. The ground shook again and again as the hornets landed on the field and immediately began skewering the fleeing spectators. An official sprinted by Caroline, his eyes wild with fear. Caroline met his gaze for a split second before a hornet swooped down from above and snatched the poor guy with his gaping, pincher-lined mouth. The official's scream got further away as the hornet carried it up until his wails were cut off with a sickening crack. Then he plummeted back to the track, slamming into the ground in front of Caroline, a mass of broken bones and gore. She could feel the spray of his blood hit her face. Its warm droplets tore her out of her shock. She screamed and staggered away, trying to find cover. She locked onto the stands. A group of survivors gathered underneath. Caroline shot towards it. As she ran, she saw that cartoon hornet bobbing around in her periphery. Jessa, the girl from her heat, hobbled alongside her, spent from the exertion of their race. She and Caroline shared a look. They nodded, a silent understanding. They could do this. But Jessa suddenly stopped, a stunned expression on her face. Both Jessa and Caroline looked down to see the shining tip of a stinger jutting from her chest, right through the hornet emblem. Jessa's scream tore into Caroline's eardrums, but she couldn't help her, and every instinct in her body told her to keep moving. She booked it for the bleachers, fighting back a sob, trying not to listen to the people dying at her back. All around her was carnage, bodies bubbling with radiation, hornets snatching whoever was left. Caroline was almost at the bleachers when a dark, sinister shadow passed over her, cooling the very air around her. She looked up, straight into the pitch-black, bottomless eyes of the largest hornet she had ever seen. Caroline had seen a lot of disturbingly large hornets by this point, so when I say that this thing was big, I want you to understand. The sheer magnitude of this thing can't be understated. The other insects were like cars. This was the size of a plane. Its stinger stretched all the way from the end zone almost to the center of the field. This was the new queen in all her lethal mutated glory. And she wouldn't take its eyes off Caroline. Caroline ventured a glance at the stands. They were just a few feet away. She could make it. She'd just run the fastest 800 in Nebraska history. She could. Before she could move, the queen lunged, its mouth stretched out wide, pincers bared, ready to split Caroline in half. But Caroline dove out of the way, hit the ground, then frantically rolled under the nearest bleacher. She got there just as the hornet's massive stinger clanged against the metal. Caroline looked up through the gap in the stands into the angry hornet's eyes. It stared back at her, lethal, menacing. Her heart pounded. A little metal wasn't going to stop this thing. It could tear the whole stadium apart. But for whatever reason, it didn't. The queen just stood there, watching Caroline. A strange thing happened then. Sort of like a communion between two souls, only it wasn't a nice one. Something about that queen's stare touched a deep, horrific nerve in Caroline. It made her stomach clench and her palms sweat, until all she could do was leave. She crawled deeper under the bleachers, away from the queen's unnerving stare, where a group of other people huddled. They were all shaking, terrified, as they listened to the wails of the butchered spectators and athletes on the field. Caroline took stock of the survivors. They wouldn't be safe for long. The queen was just waiting outside. And really, any of the other hornets could get under the bleachers if they wanted. It was open air on either side. So Caroline knew something had to be done, but she had no idea what. She was so scared. This fear, it debilitated her, made her stop moving, stop thinking. She just won states because she refused to let fear inside. Now, it was so overpowering, there was no way she could chase it away. Instead, she waited for someone else to do something, but no one else did. No one moved. With each passing second, Caroline got more terrified and more certain it had to be her. Since she couldn't get rid of her fear this time, she'd just have to use it. She looked around for inspiration, something to do. Her eyes landed on the hot dog stand, right next to the bleachers. It had a propane grill. Okay, fire. Maybe she could burn the hornets out. But what would stop them from flying away? Caroline looked out at the field, through the metal rungs, and locked onto the netting on the other side. The backstop for the baseball field. It could work. It had to. She peered out of the bleachers. The queen had joined the other hornets, which were stalking around the infield, antenna twitching. A few fed on the corpses that littered the ground. They were distracted, for now, which meant she had minutes or seconds to trap them. Caroline moved, slipping out from the bleacher's cover. She skirted the edge of the track, keeping to the outside of the fence. It took her a second to realize she wasn't alone. A few of the survivors had seen what she was doing and followed her, which was a huge relief. She motioned for two of them to go to one side. She and another girl went to the other. Now, I know you're expecting something to go wrong, but it didn't. They got to the netting without incident and started untying the knots. They were beefy, plastic-heavy rope knots, but their fingers nimbly unplucked them, one by one. When they were done, Caroline and the girls on the other side grabbed the top of the net and ran. They sprinted back to the bleachers, carrying the netting with them over their heads, so that it spread over the track, a knit top on a jar. That's when it went wrong.
Have you ever woken up with a funky symptom like a swollen, itchy eye, funky-looking rash, tight pain in your neck, or persistent cold that won't go away, and immediately Googled it or searched TikTok to see what's wrong? We've all gone down that rabbit hole, but it's time to get the help you really need with ZocDoc. ZocDoc is a free app and website where you can search and compare high-quality, in-network doctors and click to instantly book an appointment. Appointments made through ZocDoc also happen fast, typically within just 24 to 72 hours of booking. You can even score same-day appointments. If I needed this product, it's what I'd use. Stop putting off those doctor's appointments and go to ZocDoc.com/run to find and instantly book a top-rated doctor today. That's ZocDoc.com/run. ZocDoc.com/run.
This is an ad from BetterHelp Online Therapy. We always hear about the red flags to avoid in relationships, but it's just as important to focus on the green flags. If you're not quite sure what they look like, therapy can help you identify those qualities so you can embody the green flag energy and find it in others. BetterHelp offers therapy 100% online, and sign-up only takes a few minutes. Visit BetterHelp.com today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com.
See, the Hornets didn't like being trapped. Not at all. And they were huge. So they started fighting their confinement pretty fast. Caroline still had the net in her hand when she felt it shoot out of her grip. She was a lucky one. One of her fellow helpers didn't let go. They were wrenched off their feet, thrown to the side, as the Hornets began to scream and claw and fight for freedom. But the other thing was, with a bunch of Hornets swishing around in a panic, they got tangled up pretty fast. The netting and the corpses and the Hornets all kind of mixed together, forming a writhing mass of hell. So yeah, the netting didn't work out the way Caroline had hoped, but it still trapped them, at least for the time being. Caroline's eyes shifted to the hot dog stand. She felt the fear rush through her again. This time, she didn't try to push it down, because she'd realized something I've spoken about before, and I'll keep repeating, time and time again. Being brave doesn't mean you aren't scared. You can feel all you need to feel and still do the damn thing anyway. That's heroism. So, just like she'd sprung off the starting line, Caroline took off. This time the stakes were even higher. She flew across the pavement, along the edge of the track, towards the hot dog stand. Once she reached it, she fumbled around its drawers till she found a lighter, a long click stick. She had no idea if this would work, but she had to try. The netting was really old, and she was hoping it was as flammable as it looked. She grabbed the propane tank too, then raced back to the track, held the lighter to the netting, and pressed the button. It erupted. The flame shot along the patch of synthetic rope, swirling amongst the Hornets as they fought their confinement. Their screams filled the air. But the flames weren't powerful enough. So Caroline tossed the propane canister into the field, where it rolled into a patch of burning rope. Then she screamed to no one in particular to take cover. The infield exploded. A cloud of flames and ash and debris flew into the air. Caroline was knocked back by the force of it, wincing against the heat pressing into her cheeks. Her ears rang from the aftermath, from the explosion, and the residual dying screams of the monsters. Their massive forms twitched and moaned, shuddering as the fire ate through their wings and bodies. Caroline staggered to her feet. The survivors gathered around her, watching the inferno. She felt hands pat her back, her shoulders, thanking her for what she'd done, for saving them all. Caroline closed her eyes and finally let herself sink to the ground. Spent, she'd set out to be Lewitt's hometown hero. Instead, she'd saved the world. Caroline smiled sadly at me as she finished. I was confused, because Caroline had called me there, all the way to Nebraska, to tell me a story with a happy ending. I mean, it was a good story, don't get me wrong. But where was the doom? What was the point of bringing me there? I didn't get a chance to ask Caroline. Her sad smile hardened as she said, "The reason she brought me here was because before the smoke cleared and the government arrived to clean up their very big mess, she realized something terrible. Something she wanted me to help her warn the world about. See, she got a good look at all the hornet corpses lying around that field, and she believed there was one missing. The biggest one of them all. The Queen. Want to know what happened next? Then head over to joinrunfool.com today. That's JOINRUNFOOL.com. You can sign up for longer, scarier episodes, ad-free listening, and exclusive Ask Me Anything sessions. Sign up now at joinrunfool.com. Don't walk, run, fool! Run Fool is a production of Ballen Studios, Campside Media, and At Will Media. It is hosted and executive produced by me, Rodney Barnes. This episode was written by Kate Murdoch and produced by Abakar Adan. Editing by Abakar Adan. Sound director, designer, and mixer is Kevin Seaman. Coordinating producer is Avery Siegel. And artwork by Jessica Clarkston-Kiner. Production support by Jeremy Bone and Cole Lacasio. Special thanks to our operations team, Doug Slaywin, Ashley Warren, Sabina Mara, and Destiny Dingle. Executive producers at Ballen Studios are MrBallen, Nick Witters, and Zach Levin. Executive producer at Will Media is Will Malnati. Executive producers at Campside Media are Matt Scher, Josh Dean, Vanessa Gregoriadis, and Adam Hoff. Thanks for listening, and see you next week.